Hey, you, welcome back to another episode of the Actionables podcast. In case you are new here and we're meeting here for the first time, my name is Peyton. I work as an NLP life coach, and on this podcast, I generally share my insights, both personal and professional, that can help you to make your life goals, whatever they may be, simpler so that you don't have to feel overwhelmed and stressed out. Towards new beginnings, since it is the 200th episode of the Actionables podcast, I'm getting back to interacting and hosting creative folks. And if you've been listening long enough, then you know I'm on this journey of learning two foreign languages, namely Spanish and Korean. And today's guest is somebody who's extremely special. She is the founder of Hungover Books, which is a platform for learning languages and reading books. She runs both a YouTube and Instagram channel where she shares tips for learning primarily Spanish and a little bit of English as well. I first came across her YouTube channel and she was generous enough to come here and to share her wisdom of learning Spanish. If you're on the fence of learning a foreign language, especially Spanish, then this episode can absolutely give you a perspective. So please welcome the talented and inspired Reema from Hungover Books. Hi, Reema.
Hi, Peyton. Hello. Nice to see you.
Hello. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on Actionables, and it's going to be a fantastic conversation. I can't wait to jump into it. So let's get into it.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to it.
Riva, I think a great place to start this conversation would be I'd like to know, how did you get into learning Spanish? So if you could talk to us about where did it really start from?
Well, it actually started with not Spanish. It actually started with a different language. So not a lot of people know this because I actually started with Japanese. And when I started with that, I had no idea what I was getting into. I had absolutely no idea about language learning. I think it was my second language when I was in 12th standard. Like the way we study here in 12th standard, we are required to have a second language, which is a part of your subject for your board exams. So I was offered Japanese as an option and I selected that, having no idea what I was getting into. And I think after learning Japanese for 2 years, I realized why I enjoyed language learning. I realized I maybe had a certain set of skills that were helping me learn languages. And I think it really sounds strange, but I just wanted to have another international language in my belt. So I thought Spanish sounds nice because I had been listening to a lot of Spanish music, and Portuguese is a little similar to the mother tongue that I speak in Konkani. So there was some influence somewhere, and I just got very curious having learned Japanese. I thought, let's have another language. And yeah, I picked Spanish, and I haven't stopped learning since then. Since that day, I just haven't stopped learning Spanish.
Wow, it is interesting you mentioned Japanese because I know a lot of people who start, but they give up because
I'm one of them.
it is believed to be relatively a difficult language. And so it is interesting. I heard you say that you felt like you had certain skills, language learning skills. So, what really inspired you to then commit to start learning Spanish?
Yeah, like what you said, Peyton, Japanese is considered to be one of the most difficult languages to learn. And after having learned, like, I spent a lot of time and effort in just 2 years to barely scratch the surface of the basics of the language, which in the same amount of time, I had actually completed most of my Spanish learning. So you can really tell the difference between, the difficulty of both languages. But I do have Japanese to thank for the attitude that I had while learning Spanish, because I always tell people after Japanese, Spanish didn't feel difficult at all because I started with something much more difficult. After that, Spanish was not as difficult, I would say, because I knew it can always be worse. There are worse languages, there are more difficult languages to learn. And in terms of the realization that I had that maybe I have some skills into language learning, this actually started right from my days in school, where we had to learn our regional languages. Hindi used to be taught, Marathi, from where I stay in the state, used to be taught. And I would notice that I didn't have as much difficulty learning the material as my other students or my classmates had. And they were good at math. They were brilliant in math. They were brilliant in science. I used to not understand that, but somehow they could not touch me when it came to languages. One of my teachers, one of my math teachers actually pointed that out. They said, you should focus more on languages. And that's when it struck me, that I was fine. I used to be able to understand concepts far more easily than my classmates, and then I used to be able to teach them that as well. So maybe it was a skill, maybe it was just being able to understand better than the others. Like you say, some people are good at math, some people are good at remembering things. I think I was just good at languages since big.
Rima, I heard you say that you started off with something relatively more difficult, and that's sort of helped you to start with Spanish and keep your journey going. I'm curious because a lot of people who are listening, who are watching this, I'm sure they have had some challenges in learning not just language, maybe another goal, life
Yeah.
goal, to commit to make
Yeah.
that commitment. So when you made that transition from Japanese not happening and being difficult, committing to learning language, apart from these, the
Hmm.
natural language learning skills
Yeah.
you say that you had, what was that aha moment, or was there an aha moment where you felt like, okay, let's lock in Spanish and this is for the long haul?
I think that came, yeah, after having started, maybe while I was in the mid levels of Spanish. A lot of factors contributed to this because Japanese, in addition to being difficult, the problem with me not being able to continue was a lack of teachers, a lack of institutions, a lack of material. All of that, contributing in me not being able to continue learning the language. But I was very lucky to find a good place for Spanish, a good institute, fantastic teachers, native speakers, and basically the way the curriculum or the language was taught. All of this played a big role in me actually being able to continue and lock in. And some personal factors as to, why I decided to lock in was, I think, just because I realized that this had potential. Japanese also, of course, I'm not saying that it didn't have potential, but I used to see Spanish being used everywhere. Like even right now, it's being spoken in so it's almost the second spoken language in the world. So I saw the potential. I saw that I had the skills that it required. I had all the necessary help that I needed. I had an institute, I had the materials, I had the resources to finish it. I think all of these played a big factor. And then I think I just committed to it thinking that this is what I choose for my life. It's rare because I don't come from a background or I don't have family who's done this. Nobody has done this before. It came as a path that was never taken. But I just chose to do it. I mean, I thought that I could do it. In moments where it got difficult, yeah, that's a separate thing altogether. But all of these factors helped, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just my own commitment that, yeah, I'm going to do this. This is the thing for me. But all these other factors as well that helped to that.
Right. It's interesting you say that because just like everything else in life, there are different contributing factors. And it's lovely to know that in your case also, when you started, you had these factors. You just mentioned that you're the first person in your family to go ahead and do something creative like this because this is not the traditional path one would take. So talk to me about, was that transition easy, simple? Was everybody on board? Did everybody say go for it, or how was it?
I think half of the time nobody knew what was happening, because nobody had done it, they had no idea. And hence it was not easy. It wasn't difficult to convince my family as such. They were fine. They were confident that if I want to do it, I do. But there was always this uncertainty, the factor that it is so uncertain. Like, okay, you learn the language and then what? What exactly are you choosing? As opposed to other traditional, pathways, such as my mom works in a law firm. So she always saw lawyers all around her. That's the part she wanted me to take. She's like, because she's seen it, it's so familiar to her. She didn't see what happens with languages. You learn a language and then what? Are you going to teach it? Are you going to become an interpreter? These are the classic, you learn a language, you become a translator, you become an interpreter. And because I didn't know that myself, I couldn't guarantee what my path was going to be. That was a little difficult, that journey of, having to learn without knowing what the future holds. And yeah, that was a little bit challenging. But luckily, it didn't mean that they stopped me from doing it. They didn't, like, say that, no, we don't know where this is going to lead, so stop doing this. That wasn't it. So I was able to finish it and then find my way across.
Right. I want to go back to what you just said, Reema, in terms of that uncertainty. And
Mm-hmm.
earlier you spoke about the potential. You figured that there is some sort of potentiality in terms of learning Spanish, as it is the second most spoken language in the world. And that is very lucky that, your parents were supportive. But I'm wondering, in terms of when somebody is trying to, let's say, in the viewers who is listening or watching this, if they are on the fence right now, they've been thinking about learning a language, a foreign language, and particularly Spanish. What would you say to them when they are on crossroads in terms of, okay, is there a future? And in terms of like a commercial future, or is this something that I just want to do as a creative hobby?
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody like that who's on the fence and trying to figure out that uncertainty for themselves?
Yeah, that's a very important question, I would say. And I think everyone should think about it before going into it, because this actually essentially decides whether you stick with it long enough and or whether you just quit it. I think what kept me going during all of that was having a strong why I was doing this. Initially, it was, yeah, I want to make a career out of this. Something is going to come out, which I'm doing. But slowly, as I kept progressing and advancing through the levels, more importantly, this is what I tell people now, is that the language didn't just give me opportunities to work, it changed me as a person. It helped me become more confident. It really taught me discipline. It showed me consistency. And to be able to see this kind of transformation in myself from when I just started the language to when I reached the advanced stages, it was life changing. So I'm so glad now that even if I just did it for a job in the future, I'm so glad I did it because it made me a different person. So for anyone who might be debating going into Spanish or any other language, I would say start with a why. No, a strong why is what's going to keep you going even when it gets difficult. And there will always be some kind of risk in terms of, nowadays a lot of people are on the fence because of AI, and they think that, languages or language speakers are going to become redundant because AI will take over. I think that's a fair argument or a debate to have sometime, but then it's not going to wipe you out. It's not like it's going to replace you while you're working. You just have to upskill yourself. There's always a way to improve yourself. I started my career when AI came in. So I haven't lost any jobs because of AI. In fact, I've had to work with AI. So there's always room to do something to overcome these challenges, but you need to become capable enough before all these factors even come in.
Right.
Especially if I have students who are at level A1, A2 asking me, is there a job tomorrow? I would say there are plenty of jobs if you are able to reach that level of B2 or C1 or even C2, or just become capable enough to meet what that job requires. So till you reach that level, don't worry about these things, about tomorrow, am I going to make money out of this? Is AI going to take over my job? We'll worry about that when you reach that level. First, see that you can become capable enough to play with AI, to be
Yeah.
at the level of AI. That's what I
Absolutely. I loved what you said about how language, especially learning Spanish, has changed you as a person. And I absolutely loved what you said about figuring out your why. And you used words which are like gold to me in terms of discipline and consistency. And that is something that is non negotiable when it comes to pursuing and working on any life goal. So I want to talk more about that because I feel like we have breezed through, and somehow I feel like in terms of we don't want to give the impression that learning a language is very easy, because
easy.
it is not. And you know this, that I'm learning two foreign languages right now,
Yes.
so
Yes.
I can vouch that it is not easy.
You know.
Yeah, and two very different languages, Spanish and Korean. So I want to get your take on, what does one do? Let's say we have figured out, okay, so I'm leaning towards learning Spanish, and maybe there are tools in the market which make it seem very easy.
Mm-hmm.
But we know the horror of, learning, figuring out the grammar. Yeah, the grammar, and then putting it into context. So I want to hear from you, Reema, in terms of when the shiny, bright syndrome wears off after a couple of days of just starting to learn a language. what is that suggestion you would give to somebody to get back and, put your head down and be consistent? Because that is something I think a lot of us grapple with, especially in the early days.
Yeah. Yeah, I see this all the time. I think this happens more often than we realize because I think a lot of learners or students, there is a gap in their expectations, or maybe a gap in realizing what language learning demands from you. Everybody thinks it's going to be very fun. Maybe that expectation, there is some kind of a gap there. But when people realize that it actually takes effort and time and discipline, or actually requires you to study, lock in and study, that's where a lot of people just quit. And happened with me also. While this happened with me with Japanese more than Spanish, because Japanese pushed me to the point where I wanted to actually quit it. Spanish, I never really wanted to quit despite feeling burnt out, despite feeling like I need a break. I never really felt like I wanted to quit. If someone is feeling that, I think it's very important to realize with language learning, or I think I read this in Atomic Habits, where he explains that, the habit forming, that plateau, that curve where the differences, that is so accurate and so, relevant to language learning as well. The growth that I see or I saw in myself with language learning was negligible on a daily basis. Okay, all that I was doing daily was maybe attending class, maybe learning a few new words, practicing grammar. So the growth daily was almost next to nothing. But I could see it over a period of 6 months, after a year, that how am I speaking like this already? Like, I didn't do anything special. I didn't change anything. How am I suddenly able to understand people speaking? How am I suddenly able to speak myself? So that curve is very slow, almost imperceptible when you see it daily, but something just shoots at some point if you stick with it long enough. I really need people to understand this sticking with it for long enough, the persistence, even if you don't feel like it. I would just say, you will not see it today, you will not see it tomorrow, but you will see it someday if you stick with it long enough. So language learning requires a lot of persistence. It takes a lot of dedication and, yeah, consistency. All of these things are so important that a lot of people don't realize it and quit it before they can see anything substantial. So I just want to tell people, like, even if you don't see it today, if it's difficult, just keep moving, just keep doing a little bit, because one day you're going to break through, and then, you'll be glad you didn't give up.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by what you just said in terms of to stick with it and to be able to look at your progress every day. You may not see anything, nothing
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
But then over a period of time, like you said, in 6 months, you were able to understand. So we all are able to look back at our progress. So, Reema, here I want to talk about that. Yes, the importance of sticking with it, to be consistent is there. What would you say are some of those habit changes? Like we have established that, of course, we have to find the time to really study. It doesn't happen just,
Mhm.
okay, I want to learn a language. So,
Yeah.
what according to you would be, let's say, those habits, those micro habits that one could create in terms of their busy schedule to lock in that 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day to start studying?
I think systems. What I would say is a person should be able to design a system that works for them. And there's a lot of factors here at play. So when I talk about a system, let me give you an example of what I did. When I did my A1, I did a traditional course. And because the course went so fast, I didn't really feel like I was at A1 yet. But then I took a gap and then appeared for my DELE A1 exam, DELE being the official exam, the Spanish exam. I had about 3 months to prepare for this exam. So I had 3 months to go over all the material that were already taught to me and then appear. So I knew that I had to find a way to be able to work on this to reach that A1 level. And it was not going to happen just by passively reading through my notes or just doing a grammar exercise. That was not the kind of level I wanted to be on. So at that point in life, I think this was 2017 or 20, I died a long time ago. I designed a system to learn vocabulary. And I've talked about this in like a few videos on my channel, where I made a system to write down the words that I was coming across every day. As you may know from learning the language itself, there is so much vocabulary that comes across, and a lot of times we get overwhelmed, like, I can't keep up with this. So because I was feeling that as well, I made it a part of my system to write it down in a notebook. And my system was every night before going to bed in my bedroom itself, I would study one side of my notebook. And that just had to be. And it worked very well because I had a dedicated time to this. I was going to study that list before going to sleep in the night. Everybody has gone to bed. My whole family is sleeping. It's quiet. I'm going to study then. I'm going to study in my bedroom where I have a desk. So all of these decisions are taken out as to what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do. My
Right.
system was very clear. Before bed, in the bedroom, 15 words a night for 3 months till I reached the exam. That I cannot tell you, Peyton, because I was able to follow it so much. It really set me up for the whole journey of, even reaching C1 up until then. Later, of course, life got in the way, started working and all of that. But I still remember those 3 months, that whole locking in for 3 months, just because I had a system that was dedicated. No matter what happened before going to bed, I know I'm studying. That really set me up. So if people can think about, everybody has different situations. Some people are working, some people are students. You can think for yourself, you should think for a time that you can allow yourself every day. You can think of a place that allows you to study, that is distraction friendly, and study as per you. I'm not saying that you have to study 15, 20 words a day. Do 5 words to 3 words. You can do this when you're traveling, you're in your car and, okay, I'm going to listen to a few words and learn vocabulary. So people should really design a system as per their life, but something that allows them to do a little bit every day. And I will preach this to everybody that this will set them up. Like, if even just 3 months of doing this will really set a foundation for their language learning. And then you can figure out, you will identify the gaps in the system yourself. You will continue improving those systems. But start with this. I would say start with something like this.
I think that's a very fantastic example that you've given, and thank you for sharing your system with us. I think people who are listening to this and watching will definitely find value in this because, like you said, if there is a place already determined and those decisions are out of the way, like you did it, right before going to sleep, and those 15 things. So it becomes like a non negotiable when it
Exactly.
comes to, like, so you're not messing around when it comes to language. You're saying, okay, I'm going to study at this time and I'm going to study it here. And I also like what you said about that everybody's life is different. One size obviously will not fit
Not
all. Next, I want to talk to you about what is the fun part about learning language in terms of, like, some people would say grammar or some people
yeah.
would say listening.
hmm
I want to know, according to you, Reema, as a beginner Spanish learner, what was that one aspect to the language that you really found interesting?
Very innocently, I think just because I was into learning a lot of vocabulary, when I had a chance to use that vocabulary, or whenever there was an opportunity where someone else said a word that I knew, I was so motivated. I said, yes, this is why I'm learning the language. This is why I'm staying up all night studying. So initially, as a beginner, knowing that my efforts were paying off in terms of, whatever I was learning was actually helping me, was a big fun part, I would say, that kept me going and that made me, go back to studying again the next day. At my intermediate level, I think I even fell into just yapping, just talking in Spanish because I had a little bit of a foundation. I was not perfect, obviously, but my classes did. I remember we used to have these mid-course exams, which were just oral exams. You just had to speak, basically give presentations and speak. And I used to love them. I used to wait for, okay, new course, I'm going to have that exam. And I used to write, I used to prepare, make a PowerPoint just because I had an opportunity to talk. And I think that became fun after a while. So it just depends on the person, I guess. As you go on, you will find certain aspects. It can be just a simple thing of finding a familiar word somewhere that you've learned that can really help you getting to talk. I know some other people, my other friends also, who are like me, who love yapping in Spanish. For a lot of my students, it's very motivating when they are able to understand an audio, because that is one of the very challenging aspects of Spanish, being able to understand native speakers. So sometimes when my students understand an audio, then they are pumped and they are super motivated. And I think that is another fun aspect that some people find in
Yeah.
Spanish.
Absolutely. I think I was referring to one of your videos on Hungover Books that you said that learners find it difficult to listen because it is so fast. The language goes so fast. I want to understand how to keep yourself motivated. So you shared right now that you would get excited if you knew a certain vocabulary. And would you suggest having mini milestones when it comes to keeping yourself motivated? Because I think the conversation so far has been that we have started and we have spoken about being consistent and creating these micro habits. I want to understand what are some of those things that we can do to keep ourselves more engaged. So if you could talk to me about that.
That's lovely. I really believe in this. I think everybody should have some form of documenting their journey or just having these small milestones, like you said, to look back on. For me, my milestones definitely had to be the Delhi lower levels that I did. I think I did A1, I did A2. And just seeing those, I think I geeked out a little bit over here. I don't know. There is a video, I think, on my Instagram where I made a reel of me studying, and then a reel of transition of my certificate just sliding into frame. And I used to go back and look at that, and I used to feel like, this is cool. This is quite cool, This is why I study. So just things like that. Display your certificate, display any, good marks that you have received. I think I even have all my test papers from my Japanese days, although the results are not the best, but I still have them because I do look back on all of these things that show you your journey, like we started from here. And I think now when I look back, I just find it so silly. I'm like, was I really at this level at some point? But I think that really helps, to look back at your journey. If you have cleared any exams, those certificates can be a way to celebrate your milestones. Or keeping a journal. I think even now, I used to write in my journal in Spanish sometimes. So to compare what I used to write as a beginner versus what I can write now is also a very big milestone, because you just see yourself like having come so far, and that can really motivate as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the documentation bit is very, very important. And I personally can relate because when I started learning Spanish and to what level I know today, I think it is very, very interesting that you look back at your journey and you go like, oh, I know so many words. I can like speak little bit, and I think that motivates. That's great. So even next I want to speak to you about these apps.
Mm-hmm.
We're living in this era
Yeah,
of apps, right?
definitely.
And every other day a new app pops up, but one of the most common ones is Duolingo out there. And what would you say to somebody who is just starting out, getting the feels of, okay, is this a language that I want to commit to before they go out and spend money on learning through a institute? So what would you say to somebody who is thinking, okay, should I invest in my learning right now or as opposed to just checking out an app right now?
I think working with apps, I think we're really lucky to have access to all of these materials nowadays before going into the language, because I think that can eliminate a lot of this, joining something and then not being able to commit and then dropping off. I think that can be avoided if people have a better idea of what it takes. Duolingo is a good place for that. I do recommend the app for my beginner students. And there are so many other applications as well. It's not just that. For people who may not want to do those exercises, there are other applications that show you stories. There are audios that you can listen to. There's an app for everything, I think, now. So in terms of wanting to test out a language, I think that's really useful. But I do not really recommend applications at higher levels because I think people get too used to that. I've seen this happen with some of my students. The app sometimes only tests you in certain ways, whereas where you're required to be in a language in terms of your communicative abilities, there is a big gap there. And they're not used to that because they've only learned via an application or a website. They've only just been fill in the blanks on an application. But if I ask you a question in Spanish, then they're not able to respond. So I only recommend it at a beginner stage or somebody who's not yet started, just to get a feel of the language. I don't really recommend it so much at an advanced stage, or I don't say that it's the only thing that you should do, especially when you're in the intermediate or the advanced stages. But yeah, for a beginner, I think that's a fantastic way to get to know a language, get to know a little bit about the language. But don't rely on it too much because there's so much more to the language than that.
Yes. I think, like you said, to get the feel of the language, it is okay to start off with an app. But like if you want to proceed in the language, higher levels, then you will obviously have to make that commitment and learn from proper resources, teachers.
Definitely. Definitely. Because I've had people who reach out to me saying that they want to appear for the DELE exam, for example, but they've only been learning to through Duolingo. Is it sufficient? And I tell them that no, quite honestly, it's not. Because these exams, they test you on different abilities, your comprehension, your reading comprehension, your listening comprehension. The app is not training you for that. The app is designed for something else altogether. So that's why I say, to get the feel of it, to practice your basics, perfect. That's fantastic. Given exams, if you're committing to the language, might not be sufficient.
Right. Continuing with this theme, Rima, I think it's a perfect segue into this other question. If somebody is, let's say, getting the feel of the language and is even ready to, let's say, hire a teacher or go to an institute and start learning, what would you say to somebody who doesn't have somebody to practice with? Because speaking is such a big part of a language. You can do the grammar by yourself, you can even write, you can listen. But when it comes to practicing speaking with somebody, are there any tips that you would suggest?
Definitely, yeah. This used to be a challenge back when even I was learning, despite going to an institute and still having classmates around. It did help to a certain extent, but you can't expect people to be available for you all the time, right? I'm studying now, for example, before going to bed. I don't necessarily have someone who can practice with me now. So, some areas that this problem can be solved is obviously to just have someone like your classmates at any point. If you can practice even during class hours, that's still a win. There are a lot of applications today that connect you to native speakers for free. You can join these applications, get access. You can maybe, have a conversation with them. Um, with native speakers, that helps quite a lot. There are a lot of free forums on social media as well. From what I know, there are a lot of these language learning groups where people join and they kind of have an exchange program. So you can find these kinds of groups on Facebook, on Reddit. I'm sure if people just look into, search this, that this option exists as well. But back when I was learning, honestly, Peyton, I was not very tech friendly while studying Spanish. And we did not have GPT. Back when I was a student, we did not have any kind of AI or, even these applications. Yeah, they existed, but there was no AI. So the way I overcame this conversation gap was by talking to myself. And I think this habit has continued even now because essentially what talking to people does is it basically trains your brain to recall the information that you have learned. If somebody asks me, how are you doing? My brain needs to know that it needs to respond in this manner. So, this part of recall can be done with a person, can be trained by talking to a person, or it can be trained by talking to yourself. May not be the same, it's still something, it's still a form of practice. So, how I started doing it was constantly running a machine in my head that was, as if I had to respond in Spanish. If someone spoke to me, yes, I would reply to them, English, mother tongue, whatever. My family is talking to me, I would respond to them. But at the same time, I would think, if I had to say this in Spanish, how would I say it? Sometimes I would say it out loud, not always, but then I would at least think it. So that was training my brain to, recall. And in this context, how would I say it? How would I not say it? That helped me quite a lot, even if I was not always saying it out loud, but just it trained my brain to think in Spanish, which I keep telling people, trying to practice that recall. It doesn't have to be with a person. It doesn't mean that your brain will only learn if there is somebody else asking you these questions. You can learn this by yourself also till you manage to get some form of an access to somebody else who can also speak to you in Spanish.
That's fantastic, Rima. Like, I like what you said there about like you can have that active recall happening. Do you feel like people who are learning are complete beginners? You feel like they are constantly trying to translate sentences in their mind? Because I was guilty of this and I was like, okay, I need to translate this into English first
Yeah,
and then I'm going to take out the output in
yeah,
Spanish.
yeah.
And what I learned was that that is so difficult a thing to do. I'd rather think in Spanish and get the output. So what would you say? Is there like a good habit to, like, when you notice that, to interrupt that pattern?
Yeah, I'm really proud of you for having that realization by yourself that I need to stop doing this. I need to start thinking in Spanish, because a lot of people don't. Okay. I'm not saying that you completely have to stop, you have to take English out of the picture. That is not always possible, because we learn by associating with another
Yeah.
language, be it English or any other language people who are comfortable with. So you can't really take English out like fully 100%. But the problem is when people do, word to word translation. That's not how it works. I recently had a student I'm not sure if you're familiar with this phrase. In Spanish, when they say to play something, they say jugar al and then the game, which roughly translates to play to a game, which is completely off in English. You will never hear this in English. So when I was trying to explain this, the student could not understand. Why is it not like that when we can just. So people need to understand that these are two completely different languages. You know, different languages have their own thing. And the sooner you accept that fact that it is not how it is in English, the easier it will be for you. And Japanese made this easy for me because I had already seen that, it with one language, it doesn't work like it does with English, and Japanese, in fact, has absolutely no relation to English. I used to find it easier to learn with Hindi, correlating it with Hindi because the grammar was similar. So having learned that, I didn't really struggle much with this literal translation that, quite a lot of people suffer with, especially people who are learning Spanish for the first time, or that's the first language they are learning. But having to translate like how you did to English and then bring the output in Spanish is slowing your brain down unnecessarily. It is creating a
Exhausting.
lag. Exactly, because your brain is thinking, okay, this is my information. This is how it is in English. Now, this is how it will be in Spanish. And, your speaker is just waiting for you to say something
Yes.
back. And that's quite unnecessary, actually. You don't need to do that. You need to first understand it doesn't work like that in Spanish. English, Spanish, two different languages. You need to start thinking in Spanish. And thinking in Spanish essentially means that, there are some patterns to vocabulary in Spanish that exist, which are not the same in English. You have to learn these patterns. There are some manners or some things that just Spanish people say that English speakers don't say. It's as simple as that. It's just accepting that fact, it's learning that and being able to, think in the moment in Spanish. So for anyone who's doing this, for anyone who's listening and watching and still doing this, thinking in English and then producing, don't do that. That not only slows you down, that will give you an incorrect output as well, because that's not how the language works. So use English, but not very literally. Now, I think having been in the language for so many years, I can automatically say, when someone asks me, how do you say this in Spanish? I can automatically tell them that's too much English. That's not going to translate the same way as it is in English. You have to think of it in a different manner. Think, is there another way I can express the same idea without having to use these same words in English? There always exists a way to say what you want to say in a different manner. You just that, you have to train yourself to be able to think that way.
Yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense, Reema. And I think that is something that, thank God, I corrected for
Yeah.
myself.
And that's very impressive that you could realize that by yourself, because
There is something amiss over here. And it is so exhausting. And there is an easier way of this. And I like what you pointed out, that there are certain things that they just don't translate from language to language. And there are certain nuances to it, right? Okay, so I want to talk to you about, we have covered a lot of ground in terms of Spanish, how to learn Spanish, how to be consistent with it. I want to understand the love for Latin American culture, the way the language sounds can also play a big factor. So
definitely.
did that play for you?
Definitely, it did. It very much did. When we were taught Spanish, it was also very important that they taught us the culture. Even now, as a teacher, we do make sure that we incorporate culture in teaching our students also. And all Spanish speaking countries are so rich in their cultures. For example, if it is Mexico, they have the Day of the Dead. They celebrate Day of the Dead, which is such a beautiful tradition to
Yeah.
honor people who have gone before us. So I did that in my class, in one of my classes, and people loved it. So that was one. There are so many, even in terms of Christmas, when there is Christmas, the way they celebrate the holiday, the different traditions they follow. This was so fascinating, even as a learner and now as a teacher. I make sure that people know that, the culture is so rich. When I was learning and when I was not quite aware of this culture, before starting, what connected me to the language was, yeah, the similarities. So I speak Konkani. My mother tongue is Konkani. And we have certain words that are similar in, or almost the same actually, in Konkani and in Spanish. Because there is some kind of derivation with Portuguese, the colonies in Goa, the language deriving from there. So knowing that I already spoke Spanish before even learning Spanish was already like, okay, that's very culturally attractive. And these words are related to religion. So alma, rezar, all these kinds of words were the same. So all of these were, factors that were pulling me and the terms in terms of culture that brought me into the language. And now as a teacher, like I said, I make sure that people know that there is such a rich culture following it. And not just in Spanish, I think even Japanese. We used to be taught a lot of culture in terms of how respectful they are, in terms of how they bow while greeting people. All of that plays a big role in learning the language because there comes a little bit of pride in knowing the culture because you know more about the people there. That's how they do it over there. So, yeah, I know that. That motivates people to learn the language itself, and it plays a huge role in teaching or learning a language. So, definitely, culture a major aspect.
Right. That's brilliant. Psychology of learning any language. There is enough research that shows that to avoid dementia. What do you suggest to somebody who is thinking of picking this up, not like say for a professional reason, but as a creative hobby?
Yeah.
Important or how beneficial it can be to learn a language, and especially like a language like Spanish?
I can go days talking about the benefits of languages, honestly. And if you ask me, oh my gosh, the person might get bored of me after a bit. But from a creative perspective, like, keeping all exams, job opportunities, all of these serious things aside, it's such a fun hobby to pick up as well because it's it's gym for your brain. That's the easiest way I can put it because your brain is constantly required to learn and unlearn things that you know. And especially if you already speak other languages, you have to, break those neural connections like we do with, when we translate from English to Spanish. Someone might be wired to think only in English, but bringing Spanish into the picture, they have to break down those walls that are like, keeping them only on one language and then suddenly they become bilingual. If there are more languages in the picture, oh, their brain has to work like really hard, to keep all the languages, to be able to think in all of these languages. You're constantly required to learn. If you want to keep learning, you have to grow your vocabulary, you have to learn the grammar. So all of these things really keep your brain sharp, I would say, because it takes quite a lot of effort to learn and, keep a skill alive. So very, very fun hobby. You just have to pick the right language, I would say. Because, people might want to start a language for fun. And then if the language is too hard, they're not having fun anymore, they might just quit and like, hate languages for the rest of their life. It doesn't have to be like that. I think people should really choose what language they really want to pick by exploring some applications. That might be a good idea.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, then explore how the language works.
Right. Okay, so Reema, we're down to our final question. I want to ask you, where can people get in touch with you? And if you have any final messages for people who are considering learning Spanish, what would be your encouragement to them?
Well, yeah, people can obviously hear more about all of these things that I've spoken about on my YouTube channel and my Instagram, both of which I'm sure, Peyton, you will leave linked somewhere. So yeah, people can find me there. They can write an email or just shoot me a DM anytime. If they're considering starting Spanish, well, please do it. Please do it, and then let me know how it is going. Because I'm so passionate about Spanish and just language learning in general that I would love to share any tips or any difficulties. Even now, people write to me. And I think that is a big highlight of why I do what I do, because there are so many people who write to me saying, that I've managed to pull them back into the language from, they didn't know that there is so much to it. To be able to read all those messages, to know that people are actually, I'm sharing my passion for languages is something that I enjoy so much. So go ahead, do it. Choose the right language, I would say. First, choose the right language. Do a little bit of research before getting into it. Try not to make a big investment before you're ready. Try to explore a little bit. There's tons of free resources online, so experiment a little bit. And if you need any help anytime, then I'm here. I'm just an email or a DM away.
All right. Thank you so much, Reema, for being on Actionables. I have enjoyed talking to you and I've loved having this conversation from somebody who is learning Spanish herself. I'm incredibly inspired by what you're doing on your YouTube channel. And if somebody doesn't know, that's how I discovered you on
Yeah.
YouTube, right? I absolutely feel like you're killing it because there are not many channels, at least Indian channels out there on YouTube who are doing the kind of work that you're doing on Spanish. So keep going, keep doing the lovely work that you're doing. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I think we've spoken. I was so excited to be able to just, like I said, I love yapping about Spanish. I love yapping in Spanish. So to conversation with people who share the same passion for language learning or Spanish specifically is always a pleasure. So thank you so much for having me on your lovely podcast.
Thank you, Reema. And that does it for this week's episode. I will be back next week. In case you want to get in touch with Reema, check out her channel. I will be dropping all the links in the description of this episode. Till next week, remember, you matter, your goals matter, and it's really up to you to make them happen. Take very good care of yourself, and I'll talk to you soon.